Earlier, I spoke to counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, for her reaction, and here's what she had to say. Kellyanne, here's what I'm thinking of myself. This president's been investigated more than any politician in U.S. history. If you think about it, he's been investigated by British intelligence, foreign ambassadors. He's been investigated by the FBI, the DOJ, the Senate, the House. He's been investigated by U.S. attorneys. They spied on his campaign. They put spies inside his campaign and they wiretapped it. Oh, and I forgot, investigated by a special counsel. And then he asks to look into one person, Joe Biden, a Democrat, and he gets impeached for that. It's insane.
Well, it's very true, as the president likes to say, Jesse, that he's been harassed with these investigations and intimidations from basically the time he came down the escalator. Why? Because people didn't want him to run. They certainly didn't want him to win. I think more importantly than not wanting him to win are all the people who did not expect him to win. So they're really still trying to thaw out of their stupor from not seeing what was obvious to many other people. If you went to these rallies, if you looked at where the woman who lost to him, whose name I never say anymore, lest I'd be accused of saying her name, she wasn't going certain places. So when he won, I really did think, I mean, we were so naive to think that people would want to help the president to try to find a way to come together in a bipartisan fashion if you're members of Congress or governors or mayors. And if you're the mainstream media, I was the one who very pointedly said and very hopefully said, hey, we're going to share joint custody of the country now. We should find a way to responsibly co-parent. And you see where we are. But what are these, I guess, for the public, the question is very simple. What have all the investigations and insinuations that you have just laid out so nicely, what has all that amounted to for the American people? How has it impacted their lives? It's a very difficult question for the investigators to answer, as opposed to the real people impact of the Trump progress report that has been 3 years of his presidency. The growth numbers, the jobs numbers, the job availability, the job mobility, national security, 2 dead terrorists, 2 Supreme Court justices, 2 new trade deals. That sounds like 2 terms to me. Yeah. And so people see that split screen. They see that contrast. But I think, look, I think people should know what this really is about, and they should be more honest about it. Number one, 4 hours of Adam Schiff on camera is about 8 hours too much. It's a crime against humanity. And I know
we should get the UN involved.
Yes. And obviously, he has a causal relationship with the truth. Right. Some people are at least willing to call that out, and most others are not, unfortunately. And I think that the senators at the House managers thought that they could perhaps bring along to their point of view in a few matters screwed up the week. You have Nadler insulting members of the Senate in the wee hours of the morning. And why is he even there? Nancy Pelosi did not want to put Jerry Nadler in charge of impeachment, and boy, have we seen why. Right. He wants to get up there and say something because he has a primary opponent. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want the next AOC or the other one in Massachusetts to unseat him the way these other long-serving, unterm limited, ineffective members suffered these primary defeats.
They completely miscalculated. They put up the most unlikable, unconvincing liars that you could ever imagine. As you said, they're very hard to look at. They're even more difficult to listen to. And I think it consolidated the Republicans in the Senate.
No doubt.
And it backfired. And Schumer's not going to be majority leader. And it was just a power grab. And as you said before, this was an excuse for losing the last election and probably trying to undermine the second term of Donald Trump and delegitimize him in the eyes of the media and the American people. And as Joe Biden admitted on camera, he says this impeachment is going to make Donald Trump stronger when he's acquitted. I'll give you the last word.
Yes, Joe Biden did say that. You had Mayor Pete Buttigieg this week telling Fox News' Peter Doocy that he doesn't remember the last time a voter asked him about impeachment.
It doesn't happen.
I mean, his entire party, that's how they're spending their time and your money in Washington. Look, this is about something else. It certainly is about trying to make the country feel exhausted. You can't have 4 more years of Donald Trump, for God's sake, because look how exhausting it is. Meanwhile, they're exhausted with the investigators. And the investigators and intimidators, and they've been pontificating and prevaricating to try to intimidate not just the president, which won't work, but the senators who are up for re-election this year.
They're trying to wear him down.
That's what this is about. Chuck Schumer finally getting his wish of, the hot wish of of many decades now that's been completely elusive to him to be the majority leader. But you've got people like Liz Cheney saying, hey, I'm going to not go to the Senate in a safe seat. I'm going to stay in the House and try to get the House back so that we can work on even more in the president's second term. So there's a great contrast going on in this country that people see the impact on them of this amazing economy, national security moves, the 187 judges and counting, the energy, and also a president who, for the first time ever, made history this week, and probably Donald Trump, who for most of his life was a Manhattan billionaire real estate developer in New York City, not in politics, who said he was pro-choice. He had a conversion like so many Americans do, and he went to the March for Life for the first time ever. A president didn't just say, historic. I'm with you, stood with them, and they didn't say that pro-lifers are to be tolerated, but they are to be embraced.
That's
and he did that because he keeps making history while they keep making noise.
All right. Kellyanne Conway from the White House. There she is. Have a great weekend.
Part of Water's World. Take care.
That's right.